Alright, we're finally to my favorite section, which is psycholinguistics, because this is part of what my research is over. And so I wanted to start with what is psycholinguistics, and then get into theories of language acquisition, and then the nitty-gritty of what language is and how we process it. So for this section, you'll want to get the language theories worksheet that I've posted on Blackboard, and it sort of lays out everything in sort of a table format so you can see where we're going with this. So psycholinguistics is the study of the psychological aspects of language and how language is sort of pervasive through our everyday lives. So perception, memory, schemas, categories, attention, working memory, everything we have covered up to this point involves language in some way or form. And so there's sort of this idea of linguistic determinism, so that our thought is determined by the language we speak, which most people can kind of go, yeah, okay, true. The famous version is the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, the idea that we can only think in our language. And most people don't. This is the Eskimos have more words for snow. Most people don't take that strong view, and they take the more relative view that thought does determine some language, but not all, because you still have those amodal representations that are sort of outside of language. But to me, the best part about studying language is that it is such an important thing. So it's a major processing tool that we use. So the way we represent ideas and emotions, and then there's body language, and so it's such an important area to study because it is so universal. And so thinking about what the world would be like if you didn't have language, it's sort of like almost an impossible task to think about because we use it so much. So getting into the theories of language acquisition. Okay. So we're going to have two of these. Language is special, and language is like everything else. Okay. So the language is special theory is an innate view where language is nature. Sorry, it's built in. It's genetic. It's considered nativism. Okay. Language is like everything else view is that language is no different from the rest of the brain processes that we do. And this is a more emergent view. This is nurture. You learn it just like you learn everything else. Okay? But it sort of helps to keep them separate because the terms are sort of confusing. So nature versus nurture, language is special, nature, genetic, nativism, innate. Language is like everything else. That's nurture, learned, emergent. Okay. So why should we study language, and why should we especially study language acquisitions? It really is one of the most complex things that we do. And if you think about the skills you have to have for language, so to be able to speak, we had to have a special type of vocal cord system that we're the only animals that have. While other animals can make sounds, we can certainly make more complex sounds. You have to understand intonation, you have to understand prosody, the ups and downs of the language, especially for questions, sarcasm. You have to understand where the spaces are between the words. It is so complex. So it's an interesting thing to study because we use it so much and it's so complex, and we don't ever think about how effortlessly we do this throughout our day until you have a language problem or until you try to learn a second language, which if you're trying to learn a second language, you understand how complex it is. Okay. So when you're processing language, it requires you to encode the speaker's voice, and so that's in your temporal lobes. The rules of speech, so a lot of grammar issues. So if I say Billy hit Mary, because we're listening to English, word order is one of the most important things that we do. So I know Billy's doing the hitting rather than Mary because of the order of the sentence. Intonation, so when someone said, oh, they're mad, versus, oh, they're mad, they're crazy, right? And the nuances of meaning. So mad can have several different types of meaning, like the Cheshire cat saying we're all mad, a little mad around here. So the average high school student knows about 80,000 words. So if you think about that just mathematically, that means 5,000 words per year, or 13 words a day up to high school. But really, you only learn about 200 words a year in school. And these are all averages. And so where are we learning these other 4,800 words? And you have to think that's TV, it's friends, it's the now it's the internet, books. People still read books. So there are the learning that occurs is not tied to just schooling. So we're learning from all sorts of sources in the environment. So, the two big theories. Let's start with language is special, and work our way through that one. So, the idea is that it's a special mental module that processes language. Okay? So, this is, module theory is actually from Fodor. This is the Chomsky view. Chomsky is still kicking and pushing this idea that language is innate. This is also from Pinker. So, Pinker has a really excellent book called The Language Instinct on how language is innate, and he will convince you because he's a great writer. And the idea is that it's built in. It's part of our DNA. There's a section of your brain that does language, which if you remember chapter 2, we have already, chapter 1, we've already kind of talked about this idea. The language is like everything else theory says that we process language just in the same way that we process sound. So there are plenty of things that we hear that aren't language, and we process those in the same way as we process speech. So starting with language is special, let me convince you that it's innate. So every culture has a language, which implies that it is sort of innate, because otherwise you would see some that do and some that don't, just probabilistically. And there are these cross-linguistic structural similarities between languages. So if all things being equal due to chance, you wouldn't necessarily see languages all having the same structure and sort of grammar rules, and the things that the overlaps would not be as large. You'll also see pidgins and creoles. So a pidgin is a sort of a half language between two different languages that you are just creating enough of each one to be able to communicate. Creole is a little more structured. It's the blending of two languages. Creole with a capital C is French and English. Creole with a lower C means any blending of two languages that are in close contact. So these cross-language consistencies to me are really fascinating. So the idea of semanticity is that we have these sounds to convey meaning. So we have symbols for the words. So for us, it's a written language, or spoken symbols, the sounds, to convey a certain type of meaning. So we talked a while back about representations have to be intentional and carry information. And that's what semanticity is. It's the idea that we have representations that convey meaning. However, those representations are arbitrary. This is the rose by any other name idea. The relationship between sounds and meaning is not fixed. There's a lot of argument about this idea, but mostly our words are arbitrary symbols for what things are. And then there's a flexibility of sounds, and these two are very similar. Arbitrary is like the symbol and the meaning aren't tied. Flexibility of sounds is more that the sound and the meaning aren't tied. And so there's no reason why the K symbol should have a special meaning. It is used in a lot of different ways. 3 more. There are names for everything. So across languages, what you see is that everything that you want to represent has some sort of name. Even if it's thingamabob. So we have made up words to make sure that we can name the things in our environment, and that's a rule that is true across all languages. Or we borrow names from other languages. So like brain fart. Boudin is a type of Creole food, and so we've borrowed that language from French. So displacement is the idea that we can converse at separate times. So if you talk to a friend one day and then you come up and talk to them later, you can say, I totally got the thing. And they'll know what you mean because we have placeholders that allow us to converse later so that they don't have to have the reference. So when you say that is, this is, they were, you're not giving people enough actual information, but they can remember from previous interactions. And then productivity is the big one. So productivity is probably the largest argument for why language is special, and that most utterances are unique. So we are very creative with language, and you don't necessarily say the same things that anyone has ever said, so to speak. And so there's no good way to say that is nature. That is learned. Instead, it's something that's sort of programmed in. Right. Crazy slide here. Oop. All right. There we go. All right. So in some other arguments for language is special, learning is very quick. So if you look at how hard it is to learn a second language, when you're learning your first language, it's really fast. So you see word explosion occur in children from about 1 year of age and up. By 2 or 3, they have telegraphic speech with the short little sentences, I go, I eat. And then by 4, it's just words everywhere. But there is a critical period for us to learn language. So we have a period of time when we are best prepared for language. And critical periods are the only one in this section where they're actually in both. So critical periods are an argument for that language is a genetic thing, but it's also a nurture thing. So we have to have the environmental cues to be able to develop the genetic component. So critical periods are in both. And so there's the famous case of Jeannie. Jeannie was a mistreated girl who was locked in the closet. I think they found her, she was about 12. The other family members just barked or grunted at her, so she had no interaction with language until past the critical period. So she was able to gain language, but not fully, which if we were able to get language fully at any point in our lives, that would be totally language is like everything else. So totally nurture. If we broke the brain and never could learn language, that would be argument for language is special. So when you have this moment where someone has missed the window and sort of can kind of get it but kind of not, is an argument for both. So it's probably a little bit of each. And there is the reason that we learn language so quickly is there's a self-motivation component. So people are naturally social. We like to communicate. And the reason that children learn fast is so that they can communicate their needs better. All right, so how is this related to other genetic components? So if I'm saying this is nature, it's built in, it has to be related to the other sort of nature things that we have. And there is this dissociation that you see with Down syndrome and Williams syndrome. Okay, so Down syndrome is trisomy 21. Williams syndrome, I think, is a missing chromosome on 22 or 23. Can't quite remember. And we've talked about dissociations very early in the semester. And the idea is that if you get the same problem with several different genetic components, that would argue that there's something else going on. But because we see one of them has low IQ and language problems, and another one has low IQ but no language problems, that implies that there's something special about the 21st chromosome, because you see the language impairment in Down syndrome, but you do not see the language impairment in Williams syndrome. To most people, the physical features of Down syndrome and Williams syndrome look the same. Williams is a little more elfin looking is the way it's described, but generally the physical manifestation looks the same, but the language is different between the two. So language tends to be almost normal in Williams syndrome. That argues for it's a genetic thing tied to the 21st chromosome. The other brain pieces are that we have the auditory cortex, which is our temporal lobes, and so we do have a section of the brain that does seem to do speech, but it also does a lot of sound. So that doesn't really help the language of special people, because the language is like everything else people say, well, it's just the same as every other sound. Language is normally left lateralized, unless you're lefty like me, and then sometimes it's on the right. But in the majority of people, it's on the left. And we do have two speech processing areas that we've talked about before. Broca's up here in the front, Wernicke's over here in the temporal lobe. So a little more on both of those. I have some links. I've put them in the additional resources section because the videos don't always record very well. And so you'll want to go watch those videos explaining what Broca's and Wernicke's are. So they're actual patients with those aphasias. And so Broca's is in the frontal lobe, up here, usually on the left, and that is speech production. What do I want to say? Right, so what am I going to say back to someone? So it's the planning of speech, which the slide will go on. Maybe. Right. There it went. I don't know what just happened. All right. So people who have Broca's aphasias have telegraphic, meaning short, little, one or two sentence pieces, very effortful speech, because we have broken the area of the brain that plans the production of speech. Semantically, it makes sense. So if I ask you a question, how many years have you lived in town, you will give me an appropriate answer. It just is slow, and it doesn't have all the filler words in a sentence, like all the prepositions and determinants, that sort of thing, articles. So the semantics are okay, but the syntax is impaired because we don't necessarily hold on to word order. So you might say yesterday, store, Billy, and bananas, so you'll know that they went to the store yesterday with Billy and got bananas. So we've lost all the filler words that help connect things. So it's considered a non-fluent aphasia. So fluency is tied to syntax. This is going to seem a little backwards because you understand what's going on, so it must be fluent. But fluency is all about syntax. Other one is Wernicke's. So back here in the temporal lobe in the auditory cortex. And that one does speech comprehension. So remember, the one over your ear is speech comprehension. My slides are going to act funny again for no good reason. There it goes. So Wernicke's is considered word salad, which is the same term you use for schizophrenia. The semantics, they're not there. They don't make any sense. But the syntax of the sentence is fine. So it's considered a fluent aphasia because the syntax is there, semantics not so much. So this would be an example of it. If you watch the video, you have to realize with this sort of aphasia, you also tend to get problems with speech production in the sense that there might be a problem with the motor cortex where part of the face is paralyzed. So a lot of the speech therapy has to do with getting sort of over that. So he's kind of hard to understand, but if you watch it long enough, you'll get to a section where it's clear that he's not answering the question that she's asking. And then what you'll see in the video is that he'll repeat the question. There's something about repeating in speech therapy that helps people process better, and so they tend to answer more appropriately. So the syntax is okay, the semantics are impaired for Wernicke. So you just get sort of the opposite problem. So it appears that syntax is done in Wernicke's and semantics in Broca's, and that would make sense if Broca's is the planning of what you want to say, so the meaning is more important than the order. Alright, so to end language is special, I'm going to talk about universal grammar. This is Noam Chomsky's theory, and he started this really in the 1960s as a pushback against behaviorism. So behaviorism was arguing that everything was learned, language is just a giant stimulus response process, and he was like, whoa, hold the phone. No. So Chomsky and Skinner got in a lot of arguments back and forth and back and forth. They hated each other's books, lots of scathing reviews. And his argument is that everything is innate. So we are a pre-built system, like buying a computer with a language. And the language is modular. Modular just means you have a special lobe or module in the brain that does that. So it's kind of like having a video card on your computer. So we have a language card. And it is very different than the rest of our cognitive abilities. Perception, memory, attention, that sort of thing. And so some support for universal grammar, this built-in system. So every language has subjects, the actors in the sentence, objects, the things you're acting on, and verbs. So I went to lunch, right? So I is subject, verb is went, lunch is kind of the object, but if I said lunch with Josh, Josh would be the object. So there are 6 possible combinations order-wise in a sentence. So I can do subject, verb, object, which is what English is. Subject, object, verb, which is what a lot of the Romance languages do. Object, verb, subject, object, subject, verb, verb, subject, object, which is a lot of several places start with the verbs, and verb, object, subject. 6 combinations. If this is totally learned, and we made language up, we weren't built with it, then the odds of getting each of these combinations should be perfectly even. So we should have a 1/6 chance for each language to be in those combinations. However, 75% of known languages are subject, verb, object, or subject, object, verb. Right? So the majority of them are 2 of the options. So that sort of implies that it's pre-built into the system. So just some examples. So English, Vietnamese, Japanese, Tibetan, lots and lots of languages are subject, verb, object, verb. Only 10 to 15% start with a verb. So like Welsh and Squamish. And almost no languages start with the object. Okay. And I can't pronounce that, but that's one of the languages that does. Okay. So the support is basically that they're not an equal split. The second big theory from Chomsky is transformational grammar. So universal grammar is the idea that it's built in. Transformational grammar is how we go from what the words are to what the sentence means. So we have all these words. Now I want to think about what does that mean. Okay, so this is the deep structure of a sentence. We use transformational rules to go from surface structure to underlying structure. So we have markers in a sentence, like questions, what, where, why, how. We have past and present markers. So there are different pieces of grammar that help us translate to meaning. So if you want to transform a sentence into a question, you will add the question marker or raise your voice at the end of a sentence, which most people recognize as being a question. So, the big problem with Chomsky's theories is trying to explain ambiguity. So, ambiguity is any type of sentence that doesn't necessarily have, or it has a couple of different meanings that you can think about, or the sentence isn't totally clear. So this is a kind of a small example, but the cookies were smelled. So if you give people cookies were smelled, they're sort of like waiting for the rest of the sentence. and the cookies were smelled by John, that makes more sense to people because it has that object in it. And so with this first sentence, you don't really have an operator, if you will. In the second sentence, you do. So you find the second one more grammatical and you read it faster. So transformational grammar does not explain how we deal with ambiguity. Okay. On that note, we're going to switch to languages like everything else. So this is the emergent one. This is the idea that we learn language. It is a behaviorist perspective a little bit. Internal thought is subvocal speech. So the reason that our thoughts are determined by our language is because it basically is still language. And we learn through reinforcement. So when a child says, give me the wa, you know they're asking for water, so you give them the water, and then mom reinforces the correct pronunciation. So my friend's 1-year-old says, I need the boons. He's talking about balloons. So she gives him the balloons and says, balloon, balloon, trying to get him to get the idea that it's 2 separate syllables. This is often called the cognitive functional approach, which is pioneered by Tomasello. And the idea is that language has a goal. So we're going to accomplish decision-making, problem-solving, attention, working memory, all these things we've talked about by using language. So it's just a gateway to doing what we need to do in our lives. So we can't really separate memory and attention and perception from language because they're all so tied together. And so creativity, the argument is, while productivity is part of the language's special theory, creativity is more support for language as everything else because we use words in new ways to to illustrate different types of meaning. So sarcasm, humor, plays on words, puns, idioms. The argument is that you can't pre-program that. It's a constantly shifting thing learned with society. And so creativity is for languages like everything else, whereas productivity, the idea that you can say things that no one has ever said, is for special. So really the difference is that creativity is about using language in new ways versus I can just make up lots and lots of different sentences. As long as I have the rules, the grammatical rules. That's Chomsky. So plasticity is probably the largest argument for languages like everything else. So plasticity is the idea that if you have a stroke or a lesion in the brain, like a tumor, your brain will work its way around that area. So if you have a problem with Broca's area on the left side, what you'll often see is that the similar spot on the right side will start to do the work. So there is a recovery from the damage in the brain. Now the damage doesn't go away, but your brain just sort of reroutes it. So it's like, ooh, detour over here, and I'm going to keep working. So the less damage you have, the better a prognosis you will for regaining those functions. The earlier you have your problems, as if you can pick when you have a stroke, right? But the earlier you have the issue, the better you recover. And if you have the problem before age 1, you actually don't see any language development issues. But you might see some slower acquisition. So you couldn't tell necessarily that people had the problem with proper training, but you might learn a little slower. So you can recover from a stroke because the brain sort of rewires itself because we're so flexible. We're such a flexible system in the cortex. Okay. So the end of this section is really there are 2 big theories. Nature, nurture. So language is special, language is like everything else. And they have both have their support and cons for each one, whereas critical periods really argue for both. And I think it's probably a little bit of each. So we have to have the genetic components, and we have to have the environmental action. And so language is really a combination of all of those things at once. There's just a little bit more support for the fact that it's innate, but I think most people would say, well, nurture's got something to do with it because, I'm not speaking Chinese at the moment, that sort of thing.